Welcome to the Perspective Factory.
Thank you so much.
So my name is Christopher.
Yes.
I forgot to introduce myself in the last episode.
Mm-hmm.
Today I'm joined by Macon Holt.
Mm-hmm.
Who are you?
I'm your old teacher for cultural analysis for business at Copenhagen Business School. But other than that, I'm a cultural theorist, writer and critic. I write for Passive Aggressive. I host the podcast with my friend Ebba called Projector Pod. Why did I forget that? And I wrote a book about pop music and capitalist realism called Pop Music and Hip Ennui, a sonic fiction of capitalist realism.
Okay. And you were working in CBS.
Yeah.
And you stopped working there now.
Yes.
So my first question is, why should the Danish government fund your research? What's important about it?
I don't know if anyone should do anything. I think in general, governments have an interest in making a critical and democratically vibrant society, and that this was the project, with various caveats, following World War II, looking at the way in which mass media could manipulate people into taking on any kind of ideology, and that in a democracy the ability to be critical, not just have an opinion but have a grounded and critical opinion of what's going on, is an important thing. And I feel that pressure every time I write an application, and it's what's going to be the scientific contribution. And my biggest feeling though is my whole approach is I really just want to get in the way, and slow things down. I'm kind of I'm someone who works in the field of the sort of anti Facebook meta vibe of move fast and break things.
And slow what down? The economy?
No, slow down the kind of uncritical heading towards what maximizes profit, value, production, these kinds of things. So what I mean is by this is Meta had that slogan for years of move fast and break things.
Right.
And we're seeing that applied to a government right now in the United States. And the intention of the kind of work that I do is to slow that down, to stop that, to make time for people to actually think about what you actually want. And
so to slow down as a society in general.
I think slow down the insistence that more efficiency and more value is always good.
Okay.
Slow down the idea that prices and growth are the only thing worth chasing, because they're quite badly defined. One of the things that I encountered quite early on at my time at CBS was the difficulty that all students had in defining value. So when they talk about value production, their different research projects, they'd have a bunch of different theories, none of which had a really good conclusion about what value was. Because they wanted to always extend and bring this. I guess part of the critical education value of CBS was that they were exposing people to theories of value that complicated the standard economic value notion, so that they had to think about other things, especially in what used to be the more creative industries focused courses there, because they had to think about, but what, there's also value in the production of this stuff that is not captured in the price. And if you're a Marxist, also the price doesn't really it captures the value but doesn't capture the wage or what people get paid for it.
So you study, or you have researched critical theory. And one of the things we were going to talk about today is critical education. One thing about the humanities, which is where you belong in the university, is that a lot of Danish people that have an educational background in the humanities end up not being able to find work in their field of study. And maybe that's because the way that we think about education is, you get an education so you get a job. Is that how you view education? As something you do in order to be attractive on the labor market?
I guess the short answer is no. I think you do education to be a member of a society. I think you get education so that you can engage with the world in a reflective and hopefully positive way. Sometimes that's economic activity, but not necessarily. And it's always been, I mean, there's been this really complicated move through the latter half of the 20th century, because higher education was a kind of elite pursuit. It was a thing that only very few people did. And, you know, you would get a degree in English if you were in the UK or something, and then you'd end up being a bureaucrat.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Education has shifted, and there seems to be a discourse now, and with the structure of education being kind of standardized across Europe as well, with the ECTS system and such. There's this move towards it being vocational in a sense, where you kind of, and you see this a lot also, you know, while you're studying at CBS, like a lot of the degree programs just sound like job descriptions. Like, for example, the program in digital management. Yeah. Like, you're a digital manager now. That's that kind of thing. Yeah. And to me, what this is a confusion of education versus training. And it's an interesting kind of sleight of hand that universities are doing, where they're trying to brand things as if they're going to be training, but they still want to do this education project, which means it's a much broader, more generalist kind of way of thinking about what you're doing. In general, I think, like, not everyone who does a humanities degree gets a job that makes sense in the humanities, in relation to that. But the abstract skills you get from doing it are pretty applicable. I once met a person who was a philosopher, and he, by training, he did a master's in philosophy at KU, and he was working in the data support of, like, I think it was the government, and I think it was something to do with like water, I can't remember exactly. But basically, he just used logic skills that he developed to basically revolutionize how that office worked. Like this, you don't have to be just quoting Wittgenstein all the time. You can also use that way of thinking to solve a lot of problems.
Because I think a lot of people think in this way, also here in Denmark. You know, when you choose a degree, a bachelor's degree, you look at the statistics, you know, what are the average earnings after, and then also when you tell people, or when I tell people, oh, I'm studying business, language and culture, and then people will think and ask, oh, okay, what kind of job is that going to open? Because people think about it more as a utility for getting a job rather than like for something else.
Yes, and it is interesting to me because I guess, like, at CBS, like, I've heard, like, some of the jokes that the other students make about BLC is like, oh, do you guys just have colored pencils and stuff?
Right.
Because they're serious and they do, like, hardcore econ things, and you just go, if you looked at economics, like, most equilibrium models, like, assume humans are immortal. Like, that's stupid. You people are stupid. If that's your main thing. But, like, to me, like, I've also taught on like a master's program at Business Language and Culture. It was an elective that we used to run called Power, Influence and Organizational Politics. Yeah. And that was a course about basically how to understand interpersonal conflicts, power struggles, how to get stuff actually done in an organization. And that to me was just a humanities program, but everyone who was doing it was like, this is directly applicable to actually being in a business or an office or, you know, working with a team. And so I was like, if you think about motivation and what people want and how they might not be able to express it properly or might have weird motivations that take them in other sort of sideways directions, you're just doing like basically critical analysis of a text of a character in like a show like White Lotus or something, really, at the end of the day. Lots of people do behave in these kind of recognizable ways.
I do have to put power on the computer so it doesn't stop recording.
I think we should edit this out.
Should we keep talking about the classroom?
Let's keep talking about the classroom. Right. What else do you want to know? I mean, what do you think about this? How do you feel about your choice of education? Like, I was just going to say before, like, you know, from the so like the kids at the other part of the business school might be like, oh yes, what the hell is this? But if you're like, it seems like one of those really sensible, practical things if you're studying cultural studies at Rook or something. Yeah. So how do you feel about what you've done?
When I chose a degree, I also had this dilemma, of choosing something that makes me able to get a job. Because of course people want to get, a good job, but also the most important thing is actually just that I can use it myself.
Yeah.
And that it's just like some general things of like, because there's no job where you just take a university degree and now you know how to do that job.
No.
Everything when you start in a new workplace, it's training. But the reason maybe that they request a university degree is because they want somebody that has that, I don't know what to call that, just this way of thinking critically.
I think that's the thing, is like no one really gets a job because they have a particular degree. You have a job because of your network and experience, and if you're kind of already doing it, and that's what usually will get you something. Whereas like the degree, especially within the Danish system where it's so much about education levels corresponding to different pay increments, you just need to have one of the ones. It's not like any specific one's going to do it for you.
But some of the degrees are more, like let's say you study engineering, or then it's like you need that education to go into that, and or doctor, for example. That's a classic, or doctor and lawyer. That's some of the classic ones where you take a degree to get into one job position, and you're like kind of laid out this pavement towards you, so you know exactly a predictable career path. And that seems like maybe a safe way to take for many people.
I think it is. I think that's one of the things that I sort of sensed working at CBS was the desperate feeling of a need for security, and that the world was not offering that, and the discourse was not offering that.
And how is that possible in a country like Denmark, where everybody thinks that we're so secure?
I know, and it's also... I always I was talking with a friend yesterday who's in the art world, and I was saying like I'm kind of tired of like lots of Danish art because it's like art made by people who've always been safe, and it looks a bit like like I want to be more alienated and attacked by art normally. That's the thing. It's that kind of slow rolling reality. But there's also been the rollbacks of various kinds of social welfare programs in Denmark over the last 15 years.
But do you think that people are becoming less risk willing because they've grown up in a welfare society like Denmark?
I mean, this is one of my one of the things I kind of like traipse around telling people. Is one of the problems with the way that it's set up, which is this kind of compromise between labor and capital, that capital will succumb to like high levels of tax to provide a high level of welfare, and you'll have to work for capital and make money and basically be exploited in the wage relation, but you will have all these welfare options. And that arrangement seems to be renegotiated at this moment in time with this sort of decrease of like the amount of SU people that can access, the kinds of degree programs that are available, the decreased amount of time you're allowed to be on dagpenge, for example. All of these things become, it's interesting, more stick than carrot. If that metaphor makes sense to you. It's basically trying to, it's a move towards disciplining things. And then people aren't, they're looking at the world and they're looking at increasing instability. Like, I remember talking to previous BLC students and asking a group I was working with for the first year project, so do you guys just like feel like you're doomed, like there's no future? And they were like, yeah, that's what it feels like, with like things like the climate, with the instabilities that will come from that, the fact that no one is really taking that seriously in any meaningful way, as that's the research I was doing at CBS. It was climate related, so I spent some time looking at that as well. And there was a recent story of BP changing its investment strategy to focus more on fossil fuels, and half the amount of money they were putting into renewables, because the green capitalism things are done. So in that world,
now
the idea that you can
talking about war.
So in that world, it's like,
is that
I can see why you want to be secure.
But is this a problem we have as a society, that we can only fixate on one issue at a time. I feel like that's how it is in the news. You know, first it was the climate. Everybody was talking about the climate. Then COVID hit. You turn on the news, it's the same stuff they're talking about every single day. Yeah. Then the Ukraine war, only talking about that. Then the Gaza war, you can only talk about this. Yeah. And now the Russia, everything, more Ukraine, and Donald Trump. And is this because we're too focused in the same realm? Do we have are we thinking too much in the same way because of mass media? We're all fed the same feed. We think about the same things too much, and we don't have people thinking about the second most important issue because we're all focused on...
I mean, one thing we don't think about is the interconnectedness between things. Like the rise of populist politics across Europe has a lot to do with migration, and migration has a lot to do with climate. Yeah. In many ways, like the Arab Spring of 2011 is also, and then the war in Syria that followed that, are climate issues because people couldn't farm crops as reliably, and that was now 14 years ago, and it's not gotten better. These things will similarly, the kinds of diseases we'll be exposing as we start melting permafrost could well make pandemics happen. Yeah. Any kinds of insecurity tend to lead to a sort of shift rightwards when it comes to politics, because you want the illusion of security, so you decide to become very aggressive. And then then we look at Trump and his now rearrangement of the geopolitical order and the tariff introduction. These are all the kinds of chaos that gets under. But I mean, another big part of this whole thing, another part of why people feel like they need to double down on getting a job is this, the global economy never really recovered from 2008. Yeah. And that was a massive shift, the kinds of industries and growth models and then technological shifts, they're responding to a reality where people don't know where value actually comes from anymore. There was this appearance of value in the housing market and the bundled loans of the US particularly, and that becoming a kind of thing to hedge on. But since then, people aren't really sure. The only thing that made value happen was basically free money in terms of loans because of low interest rates and stuff like that. Yeah. And now that age has ended post-COVID as we try to correct for the amount of wealth that had to go into people's pockets to keep them alive while they couldn't work. I heard, so the interconnectedness, I guess, is my answer. It's thinking about that next paragraph that isn't written that says you have to also think about this in relation to these other things.
People can only, at least in the news, the way that the news are presenting the world, it's only one issue at a time, completely isolated, and not showing the bigger picture, maybe.
And part of that's also the history of the media and the format, right? I mean, this is a format of information delivery that was designed for a very particular form of society with particular kinds of technology. The kind of thing we're doing right now would not be possible. Neither of us are this would be only a DR studio, and then you'd have set questions and you'd need soundbite by answers from me. This sort of long form thing we're doing now is a technological offshoot. So I think that people actually can pay attention to long complex thing, Joe Rogan's most popular podcast on Spotify or whatever, and his episodes are regularly 3 hours long,
sometimes 4 hours. It's insane.
Especially for the guest.
It's just exactly.
So I think there's a little catching up to do with format, but then it's also the function of all of these things. Like I was speaking before about higher education being a really good thing in lots of ways. It's also a kind of normalizing thing. It's also a kind of a way to regulate and limit what people can think and talk about, what's acceptable opinions, what's even the acceptable critical opinion, because you can also have the unacceptable critical opinion as well. And the big thing that an employer sees when they look at a CV with a degree on it is that you will willingly submit yourself to complicated abstract tasks for a long time.
Yeah.
And that basically is a kind of, it's a nice...
You mean like your willingness to submit to somebody giving you a task that maybe is a bit boring, and you do that for a long time without questioning it?
Yeah, pretty complicated. You're basically showing that you're very obedient.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm more obedient than you. I've got a fucking PhD.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
The whole thing.
I dropped out of 2 degrees. I'm not very obedient.
No, exactly. But that's the thing, is like the boss gets to see that this person will do a complicated, difficult, maybe dull thing for a long time.
And then back to the way that the classroom looks. Yeah. You know, in the old days, the teachers would use physical power and physical punishments if you didn't behave.
Rarely at universities, because it was like the size difference wasn't there.
No.
Yeah.
And then that was forbidden, and then teachers still had to control the classroom, so they had to turn over to maybe some mental forms of power, because they are having maybe increasingly larger classrooms. You know, they need a way to control the kids, so they still use power. Ways to control, and fear is a way that they use, you know, with fear of bad grades, telling parents about not being behaved, detention, expelling kids. What do you think about that in the system?
I mean, I think it's just it's still violence. It's just a different form.
Right.
Like, I think it's not. I think it's what happens when you have an economy where you need everyone to read, write, do maths, and like those kinds of things to function in it, and then you need to massively expand education to get people to do that. And I think it's great, obviously, that people get educations from, like, you know, being a little kid. I'm pro education. Why so brave and controversial? But if you don't properly resource it, then you have too few staff for too many kids. If they have a very strict set curricula, which means they have to hit certain targets, you have to get through a certain kind of amount of content, and disruptions to that are upsetting and need to be like corrected as quickly as possible. In general, kids tend to learn better if you have like a smaller group of people with more direct attention and basically more freedom to do what they want.
I feel that even now. You know, I've always felt that if there's been a day where a lot of people were sick, I felt like I learned a lot on those days.
Yeah. I mean, have you ever listened to the Blind Boy podcast?
No.
It's this Irish writer who's he's very eccentric. He wears a plastic bag on his head whenever he's in. He used to do a band called the Rubber Bandits, and that's why the plastic bag makes sense. But he's autistic. He recently, in adulthood, got diagnosed with autism, and he talks about how in school he was always just punished for being disruptive, and also always framed as being a disappointment because he was very smart, but he wasn't doing the right things to get ahead, and was often mocked by teachers for just like reciting some facts he just found out about the solar system because he was that interested. I think the violence, intimidation tactics are a kind of violence that treats schools like factories that produce human capital.
Because the schools are also measured on some metrics where they have to get a certain amount of kids that know a certain amount of things about different topics. But this is like something like you talked about, kids that maybe are interrupting the way of the classroom, and because it's like you shouldn't speak until you're spoken to, maybe, and do you think that we have like an over-diagnosing? I know that you're not a doctor, but
I'm a doctor, just not of this.
But there's a lot of more kids getting diagnosed with both autism and ADHD and everything, and that's of course also maybe because of more attention on the topic. But maybe it's also a convenient way for the teachers to diagnose these kids with ADHD that are hard to control in the classroom, because they're not passive enough.
Yeah.
So they're hard to control. And instead of making the classroom a place that can accommodate these kids, they medicate these children with psychoactive drugs that makes them easier to control.
I mean, I'm not a psychologist.
No.
However, I do teach Foucault.
Yes.
So if I'm going to add this kind of perspective into it, one of the...
Foucault, for the people that don't know who that is.
Should I do a...
Yeah,
okay.
Please.
So Michel Foucault was a French philosopher and historian, fascinated in particular with power and and he was broadly associated with what gets called post-structuralism, so working from the 50s through to the 80s. And he was interested in power, but not just power as a oppressive structure, but also power as an enabling thing. And he would study particular places where power could be seen. So schools would be one, hospitals, the medical knowledge basis. And it's the relationship between knowledge and power, which is the important thing. And so from that kind of perspective, the sort of work that he does would say that the ideas of health, the ideas of good behavior are historically and discursively constituted. So that's to say they change over time and through the kinds of ideas we express. And in that, and then this applies to medicine and applies to education. He's kind of caricatured often as saying that everything's kind of a prison, but that's not what he's exactly saying. He's saying that contemporary institutions share certain similarities so that a student can finish school and have been prepared for work in the army or work in the factory and then processing through the hospital. These all become standardized in a certain way. With all that said, so to think about what you're talking about with ADHD, if education is to produce, I mean, there's lots of critics of the structure of contemporary education, and if education is anything, it's always going to be serving some kind of productivity need in the economy. And if it's to produce people who can sit down and do boring tasks, ADHD is a example of the kinds of behavior that come from that are an example of that skill not being acquired, and therefore they have to be somehow disciplined, to use Foucault's terms. I mean, I don't think overdiagnosis is exactly the thing. Maybe, and I don't know, I can't really speak properly to medication because I know there's lots of controversy around that, and I certainly appreciate those who don't wish to alter their internal chemistry, and I appreciate those for whom it helps change their lives. But ADHD to me has always sounded like a condition that's made apparent through the kind of work we expect people with the monkey bodies that we have to do. I've heard once also someone talk about how it's actually a miracle that more people aren't dyslexic, because the actual skill, our eye brain setup is not really geared for that. Geared for reading. That's a very particular modern technology, and it seems bizarre that so many of us can actually read or read with ease, because dyslexic people can read. It just takes a bit longer. So I would say, I mean, also the thing is, within a system, if you have teachers who are teaching too many kids, then you end up reaching around for any kind of categorization that can make it simpler. And again, what would be better is giving people the time to actually, autonomously discover what they want to do, with support and, someone to stop people ever hitting each other and stuff, but as light a touch as possible. I can't remember if I mentioned this ever in class, but there was this anarchist anthropologist who died during COVID, a guy called David Graeber, who was an inspiration to many, including myself. And anarchists are kind of known for not liking kind of hierarchical power structure. But he was asked, what kind of authority do you respect? And he was like, well, I like especially like I think like a self-subverting authority. So it's an authority that undermines itself. And his example of this is a teacher. A teacher knows something that the students don't, and that gives them a kind of power relation. But if the teacher does their job, that shifts.
Yeah.
As they acquire that knowledge or way of thinking and can actually, go on.
I wanted to ask, because you said you've been living here for 10 years in Denmark.
Yeah.
You moved from the UK.
Yeah.
Why did you move here?
I followed a former partner back here.
Yeah.
She was moving back and I followed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you stayed here.
Stayed here.
Yeah.
One of the nice things is just the relaxation of not being able to catch the meaning of every sentence and the tone and the subtext. Yeah. So it's just relaxed in the sense of like taking away a lot of cultural codes.
Yeah. Is there something you've observed? Well, probably a lot of things. But what are some very interesting things that you've observed as a Brit living in the Danish society?
I guess it's kind of related to what we were talking about earlier in relationship to the safety. This feeling that it's almost a kind of shame feeling. Oh, thanks. Shame feeling about having something to lose. That there's a kind of deadedness. As I'm currently experiencing the wonders of the flex security economy. And receiving dagpenge, I just remember and I've seen a lot of it up close in my life, Danish people becoming completely despondent, embarrassed, humiliated, shameful about being on dagpenge, and people who are not from Denmark just going like, oh cool, I can do some stuff. This feeling that you owe this society something, rather than realizing the society itself is actually an arrangement of power that you are having to navigate.
But I guess that still comes from a place when people are receiving dagpenge. They feel like, my friends are paying tax. I'm taking away somebody else's money. That's what people feel like. Yeah.
But the second you go to a cafe and buy a coffee, you're paying someone's wage. Yeah. I mean, it's this kind of like limited scope of economic
but you're redistributing money.
Yeah, you are. But then it's a great way to not have streets full of like homeless people who are increasingly desperate, or people turning to crime because they need to like make rent or something. You're paying for your own security when you pay taxes to an unemployment system, if you also insist on having a flexible job market where people can hire and fire at will.
But I guess this is kind of the welfare system that makes the people behave like this, because then the government talks about, everybody contributing their part, contributing to the society, and... like in COVID, when the Prime Minister was talking a lot about samfundssind,
like society spirit.
That we're all in this together. It's like a project, and
I think it. On its face, it's not actually a bad thing. In lots of ways, it's a good thing. The difficult thing, I think, is, and this is maybe like a thing that's particularly pronounced in Denmark, is when you conflate society with the state. Like the state is not society. The state's an administrative system that that has power over the structure of society. Society is the relationships between people, and how they make things work. So like, I'm always a little suspect. Like it's always a little. It's nice. It's better than say Margaret Thatcher's famous statement when she said there was no such thing as society. That to talk about a samfundssind. So what was the question originally?
The question was about we were talking about Brit in Denmark.
Oh yeah, Brit in Denmark.
And then also about,
Yeah.
you said the thing with Dauping.
Yeah. So one of the things I miss about the UK is just like a really well distributed amount of eccentricity and weirdness and counterculture. I mean, there are obviously a lot of Danish weirdos, and many of them are my friends, but it's there's a tendency. There's like this.
People play it safe.
People play it safe, but they also like kind of think that they know what works and nothing else really does. It can become very uncritical very quickly. And in some ways that becomes good because, like, you can do disease control pretty effectively if people trust the government.
Yeah.
In other ways, you are perhaps witnessing the erosion of the welfare state that you have because people think every decision that's being made is an honest calculation and not a particular political choice. And
like I said before, the thing about risk taking and stuff. Do you think that it's because people have the welfare state that nobody, because I feel like people in Denmark are very normal. I just came back from New York last week, and there's, you go out the subway, there's some man who's just dancing with nobody, just on the steps on some weird drugs, and then you see some very, there's like a smaller difference between people. And so there's the norm is a smaller box maybe, and in the UK you have still a safety net in some way. I don't know exactly, but it's not the same as much as in Denmark.
No, I would be getting.
And do you think that brings extremities into people, that the world is more dangerous?
Because I'd be on like 600 kroner a week if I was unemployed in the UK.
Yeah,
it's something. And then there's housing benefit, which is a separate thing. But I think the norm is very restrictive here. I think it's people here are so normal it's weird.
That's the thing, and that's also what I feel. Starting a podcast is so weird. But
I don't know. You're a white man in your 20s.
Yeah.
What else are you gonna do?
I don't know.
I guess you're going to school. That's good.
Yeah.
It's and it's ironic, right? Because when you have so many resources, when you are so wealthy, when they're so well distributed, literally anyone can do anything, really.
That's the thing. You should expect the opposite. People take all sorts of risks.
There's actually zero risk.
But it feels like there's more entrepreneurial spirit in the United States, where it's very risky to take risks. Yeah,
because hunger's a great motivator, but I don't think we should structure society along that line. It's back to the thing about
the fear education, control
fear education.
People.
So I think I find that to be the strangest thing, is people who are very determined to love their the restriction when they could be so very, very free.
And what can you give me an example of those restrictions?
Well, just the kind of normal sort of life trajectory thing. Like, you've got to get that job, and it's got to be in consulting, and then you're gonna get like, then you're gonna go gentrify a neighborhood like the one that I'm gentrifying right now.
Yeah.
And then you're gonna get the sourdough, and then you're gonna fall in love with the right person who also advances your career. And if you have kids and then she doesn't take enough time off work, then she's going to be like judged by everybody. But she's also kind of saving up for the summer house that you kind of buy. And if you don't get the summer house, like, what will your parents think about you moving to the city if like you didn't make it big? Like, why would you leave home, like the hometown, to go and like do that fancy education if you're not going to be able to like show off the material success of it? And the summer house has to be kind of modest. The apartment must be sort of very minimal in its decor.
What do you think about this apartment?
Well, you just moved in, so I'm not going to say anything.
No.
I'm going to reserve judgment.
Okay.
It's a nice location for the beach, which is good for summer, I guess, as it's coming up.
That's nice.
Yeah. So does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess in some way.
I mean, it's like...
But what should people do? And also, is that a bad thing?
I mean, it's definitely like a ability to live better than a king in the 1400s by a long way. I just think that there's a lot more potential if you feel a bit more free and a bit more present and a little bit less off a set track. And then you can maybe make some decisions about how you want to organize things. Because at the same time, you're looking at kind of ridiculously high levels of stress in the workplace for people who are like pretty well protected. There's a lot of the problem with any of those particular plans, like none of those actions in and of themselves is a bad thing, but the judgments that you'll get for failing them, or the internalized judgments you'll generate for your own failure to get them, those are very, very toxic. And deviation then becoming a kind of suspicion thing. Like if you go off the track in some way, people look at you like, oh, yeah, you didn't do it right.
But is that again a symptom of the welfare state, that we have to be in this together, that I make your business my business because we kind of have a shared economy in the government? And then again, society, I know you say that's not the same thing as the state.
Yeah, but I mean, sure, but at the same time, again, just to bring up Graeber another time, there was a clip I saw recently of someone reading from his book Debt, and he was talking about this, I think it was a British anthropologist who was studying Inuit people in, I think it was somewhere in Canada, and one of the people he was studying came over and like gave him some food, and then he said, "Oh, thank you." He's like, "Don't thank me. We don't do that. I'm a human. That's what we do. Like we take care of each other. Like the ways we look after people don't need to have that kind of policing function. Like people are usually pretty generous and giving, and if they feel safe enough. If they don't feel safe enough, things get weird."
So what should we do here in Denmark?
You can't really do it here. I think people need to like actually understand that they're really free.
Yeah.
Understand that if they've got the forms in order, then they should be able to act in a way which is driven by interests and curiosity and some degrees of ambition, but mostly just like think what do you actually want? This is the sort of thing I was talking about in the course, right? Like, don't give me a balanced answer. Tell me what you want. Tell me why you should have it. Like, think about how you're actually going to go about doing things. I think recognizing the degree of freedom that is made possible in the system is a really good step to maybe making it something that can actually make a kind of impact in the world. Because right now, also people look at this place like, it's always somewhere. Denmark's always a place that someone like Bernie Sanders will talk about as like a great example, and that's because he's fighting a very specific fight of like we shouldn't let the sick die because they're poor, which is a different kind of thing. But I mean, the other side of it is people also kind of think this place is boring, and so there's a kind of a reticence to like embrace the kinds of good things about this society for risk that it's going to remove. Ambition, drive, curiosity, even though lots of those things are still there, they're necessary to function, but I think that a lot more can be done with these resources if people were a little less intense on policing each other and themselves.
That's some good advice.
Right.
Well,
should we
let's say thank you so much for being here today.
It's a pleasure.
And you have a podcast.
I do.
If people want to listen more of your voice.
Yes, then just go onto the podcatchers and search for Projector Pod, and you can hear me and my good friend Ebba Wester talking about mostly contemporary cinema in a similar format of rambles. She brings the film nerd, I bring the white guy energy who feels he can talk about anything to it, and between that we have some pretty good conversations.
All right. Well, thanks for today.
Thank you very much.